Hi everyone, it's Plastic EP coming in from Melbourne, Australia. Let me tell you, I've got two fantastic people. I've got Ivor Davis, he's groovy and he's famous. Thank you, Leslie. Do a big introduction for us, Ivor, about art.
Arthur Schreiber is unique in the Westinghouse network. He's a legend everywhere, and he's also a giant in his home state in New Mexico. So, Arthur, lovely to see you. Now, I was very lucky to meet Arthur Schreiber 60 years ago this year. He came to me. Well, he came to me. I came to him and said, Arthur, what's this all about? What do you know about the Beatles? And Arthur said, I know nothing about the Beatles. He said, what do you know about the Beatles? I said, Arthur, I know nothing about the Beatles. So we were both strangers in paradise. Anyway, so Arthur, I can't tell you that within minutes, Arthur became friends with the Beatles, and he enabled me to join them as well. And I want him to talk about, I mean, whenever we had Monopoly games at 3 a.m, Arthur would call me to come and join John for Monopoly games. So Arthur, this political giant for the Westinghouse radio network, found himself covering 4 unknown rock and rollers. So Arthur, good afternoon, good evening, and give us a shout.
Good afternoon, Ivor. Good afternoon, Plastic EP. It's great to be here, and welcome to Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Beatles art. Tell us about meeting the Beatles and what it was like on the tour.
Well, that's a question I get probably more often than anything else, Plastic. People want to know, well, how did you get on the Beatles tour? And what happened was that back in 1964, when the Beatles then decided, Brian Epstein decided that he would do a tour of North America, then immediately radio stations started making bids to bring the Beatles to their city. And one day I came back from lunch and I stopped in the program director's office, and everybody was gathered around, seemingly the whole staff in this one room, and it was like a wake. There was silence. And I said, what's wrong? And a voice spoke out and said, well, WHK got the Beatles. That meant our number one competitor, WHK, was paying $15,000 at that time, a lot of money, to bring the Beatles to Cleveland. I knew that that was going to hurt us in the ratings. And I don't know whatever possessed me, but I looked at the program director. I said, why don't you put me on the Beatles tour? And the rest is history.
Did you, like me, know very little about the Beatles? Had you ever seen them, Art? I mean, what did you know? Was it a learning process?
Oh, I didn't know anything. I knew nothing. I had seen them on the Ed Sullivan Show. And when I said, put me on the Beatles tour, and then they the program director ran into the manager's office, and they called the bureau chief of Westinghouse, who handled the foreign and national news, a job that I later was to have a couple of years later. Well, he objected. He said, no way is Schreiber going to cover the Beatles. He's got to cover the Democratic Convention in Atlantic City. And I was assigned in those days to manned space. I was part of the manned space reporting team. I then also was covering civil rights, and I traveled with Martin Luther King all through the early 60s. And also I covered national politics, traveling with Jack Kennedy and his family when he was fighting it out to be on the Democratic ticket for president. And then I traveled with Lyndon Johnson. I covered the funeral, of course, of Kennedy's. And I traveled with Lyndon Johnson. I traveled with Nixon, Goldwater, lots of politicians. But that was what I was doing. So I didn't cover entertainment. I didn't cover music. I did in first place. I didn't know anything about music, and so it was a very difficult job. If my son were here today, he would say the last person in the world who should have ever been on the Beatles tour was his father.
The thing is, I remember vividly, you actually complained about it. You preferred politics, Arthur, but you got on very well with them because I saw you giving the Beatles an education about the politics of America. You were there. Yes. You were their professor.
Yes, and Ivor, I was very fortunate when I met the Beatles with Derek Taylor, as we all did, as you know. Derek Taylor was, in my day, they called them press agents. He was head of the communications for the Beatles on the tour. And when he took me into the Beatles room to meet all four of them, he mentioned the fact that I was covering politics and civil rights and man's space. And that impressed the Beatles because I don't think they had ever had a news person who covered politics, certainly, ever to cover them. And so it really worked out very well. And John Lennon, for whatever reason, as you know, on charter planes and charter buses, etc., people sit in the same seats. Once they sit down, that is their seat for the remainder of the tour. And John and I just happened to sit together on the plane, and he immediately started questioning me about Kennedy. He had met Kennedy at one time, and he was very upset about the assassination, as we all were, of course. But that really affected John in many ways. And also, he wanted to know about Martin Luther King. He had not met him, but he certainly had followed him, and he was well aware and very up on what was happening in America, as well as what was happening in his own country.
Now, Art, I want to ask you if I can, knowing the Beatles on that tour and Beatlemania, it must have been so crazy with the female fans. What did you actually see when you were seeing these concerts? What was going through your head?
That was something I had never experienced. My first night on the tour, well, let me explain. The bureau chief never relented that he wasn't going to allow Art Schreiber to cover the Beatles. And it ended up that the program director, the manager, and I were flown into New York from Cleveland and met with the executive vice president of the company and the president of the company. And the compromise was that I would cover the Democratic convention the first week because it began when the Beatles tour began on the West Coast. You were there, Ivor, and you know full well all the places that you went on the West Coast. But then I was to join the Beatles when the Democratic convention ended, and I flew to New York to where they performed two performances at the old Forest Hills tennis complex, where all the great tennis tournaments were held in those days. And now it's a housing development, but it was where the Beatles appeared, and I joined them on that second night. And guess what? I didn't know it until I got there. I had come from Atlantic City, where I had spent 9 days preparing and then covering the Democratic convention. And guess where we went after that second concert in New York? We went right down the turnpike in New Jersey to Atlantic City. Yeah. So George Harrison, not George Harrison, the Beatle, but George Harrison, the columnist for the Liverpool Gazette. And Ivor, you knew him, and if he's still alive, you probably still do. Well, when we got to, the Beatles went down by limo, down the turnpike, the rest of us in a bus, and suddenly the bus stopped halfway down and pulled off the freeway, and we didn't know what was happening. The door opened, and the Righteous Brothers got on. Well, here they had missed the bus. The Righteous Brothers were one of the backups to the Beatles, along with Jackie DeShannon, and they missed the bus, and they hired a cab to chase the bus down the freeway. And by golly, the cab caught up with him and managed to signal the driver. Remember, no cell phones in those days, no computers, no satellites, but the driver pulled off. Righteous Brothers got on, and we continued to Atlantic City. When we got to the hotel, the Lafayette Hotel on New York Avenue, George Harrison, the columnist, and yours truly, we didn't have any rooms. And so they said, we'll get you down a couple of hotels down the boardwalk. Well, they sure did. It was a couple of, it was a flea bag, and we stayed there that night. And the next morning, we agreed to meet in the lobby, and then we walked out, got a cab, and I said to the driver, after he loaded our luggage into the cab, into the trunk, I said, Lafayette Hotel. He said, you gotta be kidding. He said, the Beatles are there. I can't get within 6 blocks of that. And I said, well, do the best you can. Well, he was right. We didn't get very close. And finally, the crush of people stopped us. The cab driver, we all got out, paid our fare. And the worst mistake he made was he opened the trunk. And George Harrison, the columnist, had an old piece of luggage that had to be in the Battle of the Trafalgar. It was so beat up and ugly, and he had written in white paint, G. Harrison, across this old piece of luggage on both sides. Well, when the cab driver opened the trunk and those kids saw George Harrison, everybody screamed. And the next thing, all 3 of us, George Harrison, myself, and the cab driver, were all down on the ground halfway under the cab, and people were clawing at our clothing. And of course, unfortunately, I had a suit on. They ripped my jacket, including my pants, and that was my first suit that I lost on the tour. I lost two more before the tour was over, and I also on the tour lost a couple of typewriters, lost a couple of tape recorders. That was, I never had experienced anything like that. And that, of course, as Ivor knows, we were to put up with every night, night after night after night. But fortunately, we didn't get out there and get beat up as much as we got beat up on that first meeting of the great unwashed, waiting to get a glance at the Beatles.
I mean, you were so friendly with the Beatles, Arthur, that you were much. I mean, your rivals were green with envy because you were able to pull a fast one over these rival radio station that had paid a lot of money for the exclusivity.
Yes.
But Arthur Schreiber came along and was immediately bosom buddies with the Beatles. And
yes, in fact, Plastic. What was great was WHK had paid all this money to bring the Beatles to Cleveland, but of course I was on the tour, and I even came down the steps with John when we arrived in Cleveland, and the WHK disc jockeys were wearing their blazers saying WHK, and they were waiting to talk to John. And was the first question somebody asked him, John turned to me and said, is it okay to answer? And so that began what really was a great day for me. And that evening, when the concert started, the kids stood up on the backs of the chairs and anything to get a higher glimpse of a Beatle. And the police chief of Cleveland, or he was the assistant chief, plus the fire chief was there. They stopped the concert. And it was the only time a concert has ever been stopped on a Beatles concert. And I was standing in the wings, and John came off very furious. They all were furious, but the concert had been stopped, and John said, come on, Art, with me. And we went to the elevator and up to the green room, and I got them into the green room, slammed that door and locked it. And I grabbed the phone and called my station, which was a few blocks away. And I was interviewing the Beatles for a half hour while poor HK was down on the concert floor trying to make excuses that the concert had been halted and stopped, and there was nothing they could do about it. It was probably one of the best beats that I've ever had in all of my news career.
We all got up, and particularly you, in the middle of the bloody night to play Monopoly with John. And I know you have a wonderful story about one of the nights and when he got on the phone. So go ahead, tell us about playing Monopoly with John in the middle of the night.
Well, for the second day in Atlantic City, they had several days there, as you remember, and did two concerts. But John said to me the second day, we were standing around, and he said, do you play Monopoly? And I said, yeah, I play with my kids. He said, I have a board. It shocked me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. Okay, you have a Monopoly board. He said, George and I play. he said, these other guys play poker. And he said, would you play with us? And I said, yes, I would. Because, folks, I lost my first paycheck in the Army in a poker game. When I went to the Army, we got $30 a month as a private. I lost my $30, and I have never played poker since. And that was a long, long time ago. And so I played Monopoly night after night after night. George was always the banker, and John wanted the battleship or the racing car, or he could never quite decide what emblem or what piece of equipment he was going to have for his. But we had wonderful times playing Monopoly and discussing a lot of politics, a lot that was going on politically, not only here in America, but in Great Britain also. I kick myself today because I never recorded one bit of this. John would stop the game and say, wait a minute, and he would call his wife in London. And then he would say, put the baby on. And he would be going, goo, 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 say hello to daddy, boo, 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 boo. And I didn't record one bit of that. And I don't know what was wrong with me, but I didn't. And I feel badly today that I didn't, no more than I'll bet Ivor feels badly today because, as Ivor, you know, John and Paul, even though they didn't sit together, Paul and I sat together, but Paul would come up and they would write music together, but throw stuff on the floor. And the floor was littered with their writings. I don't remember one soul picking up one piece of paper.
Yeah.
Think what we could have had today if we would have only done that.
If we'd done that, Arthur, we could have been living the lap of luxury.
We could have been living like plastic.
Yes, exactly. We could have been contenders. We could have been. Oh, wow.
Yes.
It was your fault. Oh, no, it was my fault. Anyway, what are you going to do? Go ahead.
And also, we don't forget, I'm sure Ivor, you're going to, you know this, but I don't want us to close the show without me explaining how Paul McCartney saved my career. He really did. Yeah, you want to hear that?
Yes, please.
Okay. As I've told you, the bureau chief, who was the boss of any foreign or national news coverage, he was angry with me from the very beginning because he, at the end of all that discussion, didn't want Art Schreiber covering the Beatles. Now, what was interesting was, if you remember now or look back, in 1964, the networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC, CBS, and ABC, not one of them covered the Beatles. They could have had someone on that tour immediately, but they didn't. So Westinghouse, being like the fourth biggest broadcaster at that time of all the networks, because we weren't a network, but we were a huge, big, important broadcasting company in America. And what we did was we sold them our coverage to most of the networks. I think all of them bought something from us. Well, okay, the bureau chief used to talk to me whether I would covering civil rights or man's space or whatever. He'd call me and say, hey, I got a date, I got an idea for this story. And he'd give me ideas. He was just a tremendous editor, a great person. And we were great friends. But he never talked to me once I hit the tour. We were in Milwaukee, and my phone rang in the hotel, and it was the bureau chief, Jim Snyder. He talked to me. He said, my daughter, Margaret Ann, has a ticket to see you guys when you come to Baltimore. He said, I want autographs. Oh, boy. We had made a deal, maybe Ivor didn't, I did, with the Beatles, that we would never ask for an autograph. And I never did.
Neither did I. Go ahead.
But I had to say to Jim, I can't do it. He hung up on me, and I knew I was in big trouble. Okay, the tour is almost over. We're on our way back to New York, where the Beatles performed at the Paramount Theater that night. The next day, they went home. And John and I sat together, but John had gone somewhere, and Paul came up and said, where's John? I said, I don't know. He started to walk away. I said, Paul, do me a favor. He said, what? I said, my boss's daughter saw you in Baltimore. She waved to you, and she thinks you waved back. He said, turn it off. I turned the tape recorder on, and I said, I'm with the Beatles, with Paul McCartney. They leave for home tomorrow. And I said, Paul, Margaret Ann Snyder saw you at Baltimore, and she waved to you, and she thinks you waved back. And Paul said, of course you did. I looked out there and saw that little brown-haired girl, and I said, that's Margaret Ann Snyder. And he went on and on. Oh, it was beautiful. I still have the tape that we made. When I got home, I had an engineer put it on a cassette, and I sent it to Jim Snyder, but I didn't say a word. I didn't write anything. I just mailed it to him. A couple of weeks later, he called me. He said, we had a babysitter last night. I took the babysitter home, and I came back, and I passed Margaret Ann's room, and I thought I heard something. I pushed the door open, and there she was, wide awake, with the tape recorder right by her ear. And she looked up at me and said, Daddy, he said my name. He said my name. That saved Art Schreiber's career.
Art, can you please tell us about your book that's out there? We want everyone to go out there and buy it.
The name of the book is Out of Sight.
Out of Sight.
And then here's the CD.
Yeah, I have a CD and Out of Sight. And it really isn't. Ivor did a marvelous job on his book because he had time and has taken the time to write about each concert and what happened and so forth. What I tried to do in this book is I lost my sight at age 56. I woke up one morning and the lights were out. I lost my sight overnight. And the company that I worked for, Hubbard Broadcasting, and they're still a very major broadcaster in America. They never gave up on me. They stuck with me. I'd only been with them 2 years, and they never gave up on me. They kept me on the payroll. I was out 7 months going through surgeries. I didn't know how to function as a blind man. And I tried to write about it in this book because I have learned, talking to so many people who are now getting older and they're losing their sight and they think it's the end of the world. It isn't the end of the world if you're willing to accept it and get some training. You need a lot of training in what we call blind skills, mobility, today, technology, because we didn't have, when I went blind, we didn't have computers, and we didn't have the technology we have today. But I wrote the book hoping that it would help people who are getting older and losing their sight.
Ivor, your book now has been extended. The Beatles and Me on Tour show, everyone.
If you read my book, there's all the details, everything you wanted to know about Arthur Schreiber in it. And so get my book and read all about Arthur, who is my hero.
It's available on Amazon.
Okay, I just want to say the world loves your art for what you've done in your career. Plastic EP salutes you. You are a legend, and I want to say, Ivor, again, you are as well. And everyone just go out and buy Art Schreiber's book and go out and buy Ivor Davis's book. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.